Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is pretty simple. We take a huge stack of sources, we cut through all the noise, and we deliver the essential insights you need.
And today, we are doing a really deep dive into the life of Stephen Paul Jobs.
The man who didn't just participate in the tech revolution, he basically dictated its terms.
Absolutely. We're talking about Jobs who lived from 1955 to 2011. And he was so much more than just, the businessman, inventor, and investor you see on paper.
For sure.
He was the force, especially with Steve Wozniak, that took computing out of these government labs and put it right into the hands of regular people.
He pioneered the personal computer revolution, the digital music revolution, and the mobile internet revolution. That's a three-peat.
A three-peat most people can only dream of, yeah.
That's exactly it. Our sources today are, well, they're broad. It's a deep biographical dive. We're covering the chaos of his early life, his career, that whole period of exile where he built NXT and Pixar.
His legendary return.
And, of course, the design philosophies that gave us the Apple II, the Mac, the iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Our goal is to really get to the key takeaways that explain not just what he made, but how he made it.
Right, how this, unique mix of a rebellious personality, Eastern philosophy, and this obsession with engineering allowed him to create all this.
And if you really look at the arc of his life, it's a study in evolution, right? It's powerful, often contradictory evolution.
Absolutely. You have this, it's almost an unbelievable mix of influences. You've got the 70s counterculture, Zen mysticism, and this brutal purity in graphic design.
And somehow that all shapes the ruthless CEO he became later.
Exactly. The man who saved Apple from bankruptcy and then, through Pixar, became the single largest shareholder of Disney. It's this intersection of art, spiritual clarity, and honestly brutal commerce that we have to unpack to understand him.
Okay, so let's get into it. The formative years. And let's unpack that complicated start, because the conditions of his birth and adoption, they really laid the groundwork for his lifelong need for control.
Yeah, they really did.
He was born Stephen Paul Jobs, 1955, San Francisco. His biological parents were Joanne Schiebel and Abdulfatah John Jandali, both graduate students at the time.
And the sources show this deep cultural conflict right at the start. Schiebel was American Catholic, and Jandali was from a wealthy Syrian family, Muslim faith.
And her father was violently opposed to the relationship.
Violently. To the point that it forced her to travel away for a closed adoption. There's even a claim from a family cousin that his original birth name was supposed to be Abdul Latif Jandali.
Wow. Now, here's where the adoption story becomes, well, just pivotal to the whole Jobs narrative. Schiebel had one specific requirement for the adoptive parents.
They had to be college graduates.
Exactly. So a lawyer and his wife were chosen, but they backed out at the last minute because they wanted a girl.
So the adoption then defaulted to a couple who did not meet that criteria at all. Paul Jobs, a high school dropout, a mechanic, a car salesman, and his wife Clara, who was a bookkeeper.
And Schiebel, at first, she refused. She wouldn't sign the papers precisely because they didn't have a college education.
Right. And she only gave in after Paul and Clara made this really unusual, legally binding promise. They had to commit in writing to pay for the child's college tuition, no matter what it cost.
Think about that. The future of Apple was basically built on a legally enforced promise for higher education made by a mechanic who barely finished high school.
It's incredible. And that detail sets up maybe the most defining anecdote about his parents. Jobs would absolutely bristle with anger if you ever called Paul and Clara his adoptive parents.
He saw them as his parents 1,000%. He said his biological parents were just his sperm and egg bank.
And that emotional commitment to Paul, the mechanic who was always building things for him in the garage, that's foundational. The man obsessed with how products were built and packaged was raised by a man who taught him meticulous hands-on skills.
That stability at home contrasts so sharply with how he was in the classroom.
Oh, completely. Because despite that stable home, he struggled in school. He was brilliant. They had him skip the 5th grade, but he was always resisting authority, playing pranks.
And his dad's reaction to that is so telling. Paul Jobs never punished him for it.
No, he blamed the school. He said the school system was failing to engage his son's obvious brilliance. That kind of parental faith, that really fueled Jobs' sense of both entitlement and genius.
Which led to a huge change when he was around 12 or 13. He was getting bullied at his middle school, felt like a socially awkward loner, and he basically gave his parents an ultimatum.
Move me to a different school or I drop out.
And the Jobs family, who were not wealthy by any means, they listened. They used all their savings to buy a new house in Cupertino, specifically so he could go to Homestead High.
And it's so ironic, right? The very house, the very garage where Apple was later founded, was bought just to give their teenage son a better education.
And it was in high school that those two worlds, electronics and humanities, they really fused for him. He was taking electronics classes, but at the same time he's reading Shakespeare, Plato, King Lear.
And that synthesis came from one of his early heroes, Edwin Land of Polaroid. Land always talked about the importance of people who could stand at the intersection of humanities and sciences. And Jobs just completely internalized that. He said, that's what I want to do.
So it wasn't just about the circuit board, it was about the human experience of the final product.
Exactly. And you see that audacity early on. At just 13, he cold calls Bill Hewlett of Hewlett-Packard.
Just to ask for spare parts for a project.
And he doesn't just get the parts. He gets a summer job offer from Hewlett himself. That confidence, it defined him.
Which brings us to Reed College in 1972. It was incredibly expensive, which his parents worried about constantly.
But he insisted on going there.
Yeah.
And then, the paradox is, he drops out after one semester.
He said the required classes were meaningless, and he didn't want to spend his working-class parents' money on it. But this is where we get the key insight, the link between the hippie aesthetic and the computer.
He didn't leave. He stayed on campus for another 18 months, sleeping on floors, auditing classes for free.
And one of those classes was calligraphy.
Taught by a former Trappist monk, Robert Palladino. It covered multiple typefaces, serifs, proportionally spaced fonts, the kind of thing most engineering students would just dismiss.
But the payoff was huge. He said it himself in his Stanford speech years later. If he had never dropped in on that one calligraphy course, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts.
It was a design choice that fundamentally changed how we interact with computers. It's the core of his whole philosophy.
So we have the aesthetics covered. Now let's layer in the spiritual stuff, the counterculture. This was the early 70s.
A period of intense searching for him. In 1974, he travels through India for 7 months.
Seeking spiritual teachings. He visited famous ashrams, came back totally changed, shaved head, Indian clothes, a very Zen mindset.
And that pursuit of clarity, of simplicity, it translated directly into his design aesthetic later on.
And we should also mention the other big influence from that time, psychedelics.
For sure. Jobs experimented with LSD, and he later called it one of the 2 or 3 most important things he had ever done.
Yeah.
He said it opened his mind, allowed him to see patterns differently.
He also got very serious about Zen Buddhism. He even thought about becoming a monk in Japan. That idea of eliminating the inessential became the bedrock of his product design.
But maybe the most formative experience that combined all of it, the rebellion, the engineering, was the blue box.
Right. He and Wozniak read an article in Esquire and started designing and selling these little devices that let you make free, long-distance phone calls.
And this wasn't just a prank. It was a serious, though illegal business for them. Jobs himself said that without the blue boxes, there wouldn't have been an Apple.
Why? What was so important about it?
It gave them the confidence,
Yeah.
the sheer audacity to realize that 2 young guys could take on a massive corporation like the phone company and actually win. That disruptive, rule-bending spirit was the seed of Apple.
So that blue box confidence, it led directly into legitimate business, but there were some bumps.
Oh yeah. Before Apple, Jobs was a technician at Atari in '74. He comes back in '75, and the co-founder, Nolan Bushnell, tasks him with reducing the number of chips in the breakout game.
And Atari had this great incentive program, right? A bonus for every chip they eliminated.
A big one. And Wozniak, just in a display of pure technical genius, reduces the chip count from around 100 down to 45. It was a huge reduction.
Which should have resulted in a bonus of, what, over $5,000?
Should have. But here we see the complicated side of Jobs' ethics. Wozniak later said that Jobs told him Atari only paid them $750, so Woz got just $375 for all that work.
And he didn't find out the truth for a decade.
A decade later. And Woz, being Woz, said he would have given Jobs the money anyway if he just asked, but the deception really shows the tension in their partnership. Wozniak valued truth. Jobs valued the win.
Regardless, they moved fast. Apple Computer was founded April 1st, 1976, in his parents' garage with Ronald Wayne, who famously sold his 10% stake for $800.
And the name Apple came from a visit to an apple orchard at a commune. That whole counterculture vibe was still there.
The initial funding was so personal. Jobs sold his VW van. Wozniak sold his prized HP calculator.
And at first they were just going to sell circuit boards, but a retailer convinced them to sell fully assembled units and bought 50 of them.
Even then, it was a messy, humble operation. Neighbors remember him greeting clients with his underwear hanging out, barefoot and hippie-like.
And one neighbor, a PhD in chemical engineering from Stanford, just completely dismissed them. Said you couldn't build a computer with a circuit board, a TV, and a cassette deck. The skepticism was huge.
Then came the breakthrough, the Apple II in 1977.
Wozniak's design, mostly. It was Apple's first consumer product and one of the first mass-produced microcomputers. It just catapulted them out of the garage and into massive wealth almost overnight.
And Jobs' contribution here wasn't the internal engineering, it was the outside, the look and feel. He oversaw the case design, the power supply that ran without a noisy fan.
And this is where we get their first major design conflict, the famous argument over expansion slots.
Jobs wanted two: simplicity, purity.
Wozniak wanted 8. Openness, functionality. He actually threatened to walk away over it.
Wozniak won that one, they settled on 8. But that fight was so significant, it was a preview of the company's internal battle, closed system versus open system.
And happening at the exact same time as all this success was the drama in his personal life. He had this relationship with Chris Ann Brennan, and in 1978, she gave birth to their daughter, Lisa.
And Jobs publicly, ruthlessly denied he was the father.
He kept denying it even after a DNA test showed a 94.1% probability, and he's already worth over $250 million by this point. It even made it into Time magazine.
It's an incredible contradiction, isn't it? The Zen master of clarity, the design genius, engaging in this deep, painful, personal denial.
He eventually started paying child support, but the emotional damage was done, and the connection between his personal and professional life here is just striking.
The next big computer project at Apple was named Lisa.
Right. And the official company line was that it stood for Local Integrated Software Architecture, a total fiction.
Decades later, she finally admitted to his biographer, obviously it was named for my daughter.
And that project, the Lisa computer, was this expensive failure that paved the way for the Macintosh.
The Macintosh vision really came from that famous visit to Xerox PARC in 1979, where he saw the mouse-driven graphical user interface, the GUI.
He immediately saw the commercial potential. He took over the Mac project in '81, infused it with his energy, famously declaring, "It's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy."
And the launch was legendary. That Ridley Scott 1984 Super Bowl commercial, positioning the Mac as the thing saving humanity from the conformity of IBM's Big Brother.
So he launches it with this incredibly idealistic ad, a symbol of freedom. But commercially, it was a flop, right?
A rapid flop. Despite fulfilling that aesthetic promise from the calligraphy class, sales just plummeted in the second half of '84. It was slow, it didn't have enough software, it was expensive.
And that failure, that gap between the vision and the reality, is what gave CEO John Sculley the leverage to push him out.
Which brings us to his first exile. Jobs clashed severely with Sculley, the CEO he'd famously lured from Pepsi a couple years earlier.
With that incredible line, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want a chance to change the world?"
But their visions were just incompatible by then. Jobs was all in on the Macintosh. Sculley was focused on the Apple II, which was still making most of the money.
The company was basically split into two warring factions.
So in May of '85, Sculley reorganizes the company, stripping Jobs of his power. Jobs tries to stage a coup, it gets leaked, and he's forced out. He resigned on September 17, 1985.
And that moment was so destabilizing for Apple. Wozniak left that same year, and Sculley made this history-changing mistake.
He licensed the Mac operating system to Microsoft,
Under threat that Microsoft would stop making Mac applications. The consequence of that was catastrophic for Apple. It allowed all those cheap IBM PC clones running Windows to just take over the market.
So Jobs' exile was this dark, lost decade for Apple. But for Jobs himself, it opened the door to his most formative period of failure and invention.
Right, which brings us to the interregnum, the decade of exile, a period where he failed a lot commercially, but in doing so, he built a foundation for his return.
He immediately founded NextT Inc., taking 5 senior Apple employees with him, and he got a big investment from Ross Perot.
And NextT was defined by this combination of technological excellence and commercial failure. The NextT workstation was aimed at higher education.
And Jobs obsessed over every detail, like the perfect magnesium case for the NextT Cube.
And what was the result of that obsession? An astronomical price tag, $9,999,
Yeah.
which is like $24,000 today. It was just way too expensive for its target market.
But the legacy is undeniable. You mentioned the technology, specifically the Next-Tick operating system. Why was that so revolutionary?
The next step was revolutionary because it was built on a super stable foundation called the Mach kernel. It made NextT incredibly powerful and stable. And that architecture, that object-oriented system, became the direct blueprint for Mac OS X and later iOS.
So the DNA for Apple's future triumph came from Jobs' corporate failure.
Exactly. And if you need more proof of NextT's importance, just look at the birth of the World Wide Web.
Right.
In 1990, Tim Berners-Lee invented the web, the first browser, all while using a NextT computer at CERN. Without that powerful, stable environment, who knows how long it would have taken?
So after selling only 50,000 machines, NextT pivots in '93 to just software.
They produced something called Web Objects, a framework for web apps, and this proved invaluable years later. Apple used Web Objects to build the first Apple Store and, critically, the iTunes Store.
And at the same time, he's got his other venture going, Pixar.
In 1986, he buys the computer graphics division of Lucasfilm for $10 million, a huge gamble.
And a huge financial drain for years. He personally financed Pixar for almost a decade, losing money until the big breakthrough.
Toy Story, 1995, the first computer-animated feature film ever. It was an immediate success, and it finally validated his massive investment.
He stayed on as chairman, but his relationship with Disney and its CEO, Michael Eisner, completely soured.
That all changed when Bob Iger replaced Eisner. Iger quickly repaired the relationship, and that led to the big deal. Disney buys Pixar in 2006 for $7.4 billion in stock.
And the result of that transaction for Jobs was profound. He became the single largest shareholder of the Walt Disney Company.
That's right, about 7% of the stock, more than the Disney family itself. Think of the irony. The man who was humiliated and kicked out of Apple was now a majority owner of the most powerful media empire in the world.
We also get this amazing insight into his demanding nature from Pixar co-founder Edwin Catmull.
Yeah, Catmull's description of their working relationship is fantastic. He said over 26 years, they never had a loud argument, but they disagreed constantly. Jobs would often shoot down his ideas immediately.
So how did Catmull deal with that?
Persistence. He would wait a week, call Jobs back, and present his argument again, but more refined. He'd do this for months until one of three things happened.
Okay.
Either Jobs would say, "Oh, I get it, you're right," or Catmull would realize Jobs was right, or if they were at an impasse, Jobs would just let Catmull do it his way and never mention it again.
Wow. So he respected conviction, but only if it was backed by a solid argument. He was constantly testing the strength of your idea.
Exactly. The reality distortion field only worked if your own idea wasn't strong enough to fight back.
That period of building foundation at NextT and Pixar, it all set the stage for maybe the greatest second act in business history.
No question. By the mid-90s, Apple was struggling. They were desperate for a new operating system, so they acquire NextT for $400 million. And with it, Jobs comes back, first as an advisor, then interim CEO.
And his return was marked by this ruthless, brutal focus on profitability. He just started killing projects left and right. Newton, CyberDog, OpenDoc, all gone.
And he didn't just cut products. He regained control. He changed the licensing for Mac clones, basically making them financially impossible, killing the clone market.
Which allowed Apple to regain total control of that hardware-software integration that became their trademark.
But it caused immense fear inside the company. People were genuinely afraid to ride the elevator with him because he might fire them on the spot.
By 2000, he drops the interim title and becomes the permanent CEO, or as he quipped, the iCEO.
And that next step foundation immediately gets put to work as Mac OS X. That tech, combined with his aesthetic vision, defined the next decade.
Let's talk about that design philosophy because it's so central to his influence. He worked so closely with Jony Ive, it was almost a symbiotic partnership.
And Jobs' influence is all over the patents. He's listed on over 450 of them, mostly for the look and feel of the products.
And the uniform, the black turtleneck and jeans, was that just a look?
It was part of the philosophy. Sources say it was about daily convenience and creating a signature style. It was Zen minimalism for his closet, freeing up mental energy for design.
And his mandate for that design partnership was simple.
Real artistship. Perfection was required, but it had to be delivered as a real product that made money.
And the first product after his return was the iMac in 1998. It was cartoon-like, translucent, and famously designed so the back looked better than the front of other computers.
And it was disruptive on two fronts, the aesthetics, the color, set it apart from all the beige boxes. But technologically, it got rid of the floppy disk drive and popularized USB.
Which seems like a small thing, but it forced the whole industry to change.
It did. He forced the industry forward. And because the iMac was so popular, peripheral makers started using translucent plastic to match it. He was dictating the design language for the entire ecosystem.
From the computer, Apple moved into the digital hub strategy, which led to the iPod in 2001.
The iPod was marketing genius, plus a key technical innovation. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but he used a tiny 1.8-inch hard drive, which made it super small, 1,000 songs in your pocket. It made Apple a major player in music, fast.
Which then enabled the iTunes store.
Exactly. Using that old WebObject software from XT, they built the store. And this closed system, Apple controlling the hardware, the iPod, and the distribution, iTunes, was the ultimate realization of his vision.
But the real cultural earthquake was the iPhone in 2007.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. The multi-touch display, with no stylus or physical keyboard, just felt so natural. Time magazine called it the invention of the year.
And he completed that mobile trifecta in 2010 with the iPad.
And all of these products carry this stamp of his personality, that reality distortion feel. His keynotes were legendary. He could convince you that a product you never knew you needed was now essential.
That conviction was backed by this legendary competitive streak. I mean, look at his feud with Michael Dell.
Oh yeah, in '97, at Apple's lowest point, Dell said they should just shut the company down.
And Jobs never forgot it.
9 years later, when Apple's market cap passed Dell's, Jobs sent an email to all Apple employees, a moment of perfect, quiet vengeance.
His whole self-concept was captured by that Wayne Gretzky quote he loved. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been.
He wasn't following trends, he was creating them. And that visionary status gave him a lot of influence, even in politics. He met with President Obama and complained about the shortage of software engineers.
And he had a specific solution. Automatic green cards for foreign students with engineering degrees.
But he got frustrated. He said Obama was smart, but he kept explaining why things can't get done. Yeah. It's fascinating. The man who eliminated barriers in design just couldn't deal with bureaucratic barriers in politics.
It's incredible how he juggled everything. Resurrecting Apple while also, in his personal life, using that period to reconcile his past and build his family.
He met his wife, Laureen Powell, in 1989 at a Stanford lecture. He was captivated immediately.
They married in '91 in a Buddhist ceremony in Yosemite. Vegan cake, a snowball fight. Very him. And they had 3 children together.
And crucially, during his time away from Apple, he finally reconciled with his first daughter, Lisa, the one he had denied for so long. He apologized many times for his past behavior.
And he developed a real relationship with her. Her birth certificate was officially changed to Lisa Brennan Jobs.
A change largely credited to the influence of his biological sister, the novelist Mona Simpson, whom he'd only just discovered.
Right. He only started looking for his biological family after his adoptive mother, Clara, died. He found his birth mother, Joanne, and she told him he had a sister.
And he and Mona became incredibly close. He called her, "My family. I can't imagine a better sister."
But the most cinematic twist is the story with his birth father, Abdul Fattah Jandali.
It's unbelievable. Jobs found out he was managing a small restaurant in Sacramento. And Mona discovered that Jandali had no idea who Jobs was.
In fact, Jandali had told Mona that Steve Jobs used to come into his restaurant, call him a sweet guy and a big tipper.
So Jobs had met his birth father, shaken his hand, been served by him, and neither of them knew. He later said he refused to meet him officially because he was afraid of blackmail.
Now, turning to his role as a public citizen. Philanthropy was this big question mark, right? It was controversial.
Very. Apple was often on the list of America's least philanthropic companies, which seems like a huge contradiction for a guy who wanted to change the world.
So what was the defense?
The defense was philosophical. He and his supporters argued that creating transformative products like the iPhone was his contribution to society, that empowering billions of people was more valuable than traditional charity.
Though he did contribute to Stanford Hospital and supported Bono's AIDS relief programs through Apple.
He did. But the final chapter of his life is defined by his health decisions, which, ironically, show how that non-traditional thinking could sometimes be catastrophic.
He was diagnosed in 2003 with a rare and, importantly, treatable form of pancreatic cancer.
The critical distinction. This was not the common lethal form. But the man who demanded objective clarity in his professional life resisted doctors' recommendations for surgery for 9 months.
9 months is a huge delay for cancer. Why?
He tried alternative medicine, a vegan diet, acupuncture, herbal remedies. He even consulted a psychic. It was that counterculture ethos applied to his own body. He later regretted it.
And many medical experts believe that delay likely cost him his life.
That's right, it's a profound paradox. The same mindset that let him see beyond existing technology blinded him to the realities of biological science.
He finally had the surgery in mid-2004, but the cancer eventually returned. He took a leave in 2009 for a liver transplant.
And it's a testament to the loyalty he inspired that Tim Cook, who shared a rare blood type, offered him a portion of his own liver.
And Jobs refused.
Famously refused. He resigned as CEO on August 24, 2011, naming Cook his successor. He died on October 5, 2011.
His sister, Mona, recounted his final words as he looked past his family.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. He was buried in an unmarked grave, but his legacy was honored immediately. Posthumously, a Disney legend, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
And his influence lives on. He has over 450 patents, and 141 of them were issued after his death.
And in a final nod to that spiritual quest, at his memorial, attendees were given a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, the book he read every single year.
So when we look back at all this, the central theme really is Jobs as this great synthesis point. He was the product of Zen, counterculture, and just relentless business drive.
All coming together at that intersection of humanities and sciences.
And what's so compelling is how every part of his life contributed. His interest in calligraphy led directly to the design of the Mac, a commercial failure that still had the DNA for everything that came next.
And the commercial failure of NextT provided the tech foundation, NextT Step, that literally saved Apple in 1997. His whole career was this masterclass in turning missteps and detours into these massive future triumphs. The nonconformity was the engine.
So we've tracked the immense power of that unique, non-traditional thinking. It let him disrupt computing, animation, music, mobile phones.
Which raises an important final question. The genius that drove him to ignore convention was rooted in this radical self-belief. But we saw how that exact same quality, that quest for a non-traditional answer, led him to pursue alternative medicine for 9 crucial months instead of surgery for a treatable cancer.
Right.
So how do we reconcile that? The revolutionary genius of nonconformity that gave us the iPhone with the tragic consequences of that same nonconformity when it's applied to something like personal health. I think that's a question that really defines the limits of genius.